Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. This one's going to be a fun one today. We're going to call this, What Did You Do Before YouTube? And you being the fisherman or the reel owner or the person that was responsible for maintaining a reel or the like. And well, by today's standards, you just put in your model in YouTube and you probably find a guy from Second Chance Tackle, and he probably has 2,000 videos, one of which might be the reel that you're trying to service. Well, that's great, and that's why I do it, to teach you how to service fishing reels. But a lot of times I get asked the question, well, how did you get your knowledge? How did you learn about this stuff? And where do I learn more about it? And surprisingly enough, the answer is go to the paperwork that came with the reels back in the day, because they were a treasure trove of information. They were something that helped the reel owner keep his reel in good condition, taught him how to use the reel, kind of explained the features and functions, and even how to service it. So that's what we're going to do today. I previewed a reel on the latest reels in my library, things that have come in for service, and we've got one very loud and noisy and kind of cranky Shakespeare Service. Now the Shakespeare Service in this one, it's a model 1944M. We'll get to that in a moment. And, well, the model number is EK, and EK, as we've explained before, is a date code that Shakespeare used. And the date code on that means that this reel was from 1961. And in 1961, we were in the throes of a lot of changes in the manufacturing of fishing reels. We've gone from conventional reels to spinning reels. In 1961, it was the first time that Penn came out with a spinning reel. That was the Spin Fisher line. In 1961, it was just the advent of Zebco making spinning reels. They had acquired Langley, which was making spinning reels on a limited basis in the 1950s. And we started moving away from what we'll call the pre-war bait casters. Something like this is a Pfluger Summit. This one was what we used to call a knuckle buster, and in that case the handle turned both ways, and well, you could bruise your knuckles if you weren't careful about that. Didn't have an anti-reverse, things spun both ways, didn't have a drag washer, things like that. So a lot of things were going on. Even though the star adjuster was introduced by vom Hoff all the way back in the early 1900s, it didn't gain a lot of popularity. And engineering, as I mentioned, was pretty much just the straightforward big gear turns a little gear, turns something to collect the line. And in many models, you had the line guide, which was introduced by William Shakespeare all the way back in the early 1900s. Well, as that evolution continued into the 1960s, a lot of changes were being made on reels. And a lot of the manufacturers, well, they took to the manuals and that to tell you about the reel, how to service it, how to work with it, how to use it, how to keep it maintained for a long time to come. And that's what this one is. It's the Shakespeare Service. And as I mentioned on the other video, the service was a definition, right? It meant a utility, almost like the electric service or the phone service. This was fishing service. It was a utility, and this one was targeted all types of fishing. And you can see it's a medium-sized reel. It's certainly not a large saltwater reel like this one is, and it's certainly not a small freshwater reel like this one. But it's somewhere in between, kind of like Mama Bear's bed, right? Not too large, not too small, just right, okay? Well, this one's been around a while. We're going to service it, but I'd like to just kind of walk you through what we did before YouTube and how you can learn from these manuals. And, of course, one of the questions that will come up right away is, where do I find the manuals? Well, this one I found on a site called ORCA. That stands for Old Reel Collectors Association. I'm a member of that. They give you a deep library of service manuals and all kinds of information on old fishing reels, and it's been a treasure. It is a subscription site. The dues to belong to ORCA is about $40 a year, And if you're interested in old wheels, that's kind of the best way to go. So I pulled the manual. It's a 2-page brochure. And let's just take a little bit of a look. We'll use this as an example, and then we'll see what we can do. So the first part is actually telling you what the reel is. So this is a service reel for light saltwater and heavy-duty freshwater fishing. Well, there you go. That's the utility behind it. It has a star drag. Interesting, because a lot of the reels did not have the star drag. It has a non-reversing crank when it's in the right position. You can hear that click, click, click going. And it's non-reversing. And that, of course, is different than, well, that knuckle buster we were just talking about before. It has models with the through access spool, and it has models with the new mono spool. This is one with the new mono spool. That's what the designation M on the back of 1944 means. And, well, they go on in the manual itself to tell you that the one for the monofilament, right here, it says it has a close fit to the case to keep the line from going inside. You can see there's gaps here, right? The true spool did not have adjusters on either side, so it did have a little bit more of a gap, and that true axis spool would let the line behind it. The mono spool did not. And then it said rigid support, construction, keep the flanges in place, and it has a strong reinforced spool, and it shows you that the spool has got a bell on it, where a lot of the other spools, like this one, was more rounded. And why was that? That was because monofilament packs in more densely and puts more pressure on the sidewalls of spools than the old traditional braided line. And you'll see that on a couple of varieties. Penn reels, for example, came out with their version of the mono spool reel, which featured the metal spool. A lot of the older Penn reels had plastic spools, and that pressure from the monofilament would break those plastic side plates. And that not only showed in models like the Beachmaster and the Surfmaster and the like, but pretty much right through. You can find Jigmasters that had the plastic spool in them, kind of interestingly enough. So the first thing that these manuals tell you is about the reel. Next thing it tells you about is, well, on servicing, it's an easy 3-part system. You have a frame, you have a spool, you have a head plate. And then it goes into how to use the reel. Now, surprising to us, because we're here in the 2020s, that it's surprising to us to think back to a time when star drags were not common, nor the anti-reverse, or what they call the non-reversing crank. And, well, it's kind of interesting in that regard that you had to take the time to educate your customer and kind of tell them how to use it. And what they tell you is that the drag assembly eliminates your need to thumb the spool, and the anti-reversing crank eliminates that, well, kind of back. So you don't burn your thumb on a fish run, and you don't skin your knuckles. And I think that's exactly how they put it. Prevents skinned knuckles from, you don't skin your knuckles because you have that anti-reverse dog is holding your handle from going back. Interestingly enough, when you go to cast this reel and you take that crank dog out of play, look what happens. When you're casting, your handle's turning backwards. So you still have to be careful with that. One of the things I find annoying by today's standards is when I lay this down, let's say I wanted to remove the line on this reel, I lay it down to pull my line, well, that handle goes below the reel seat. So you really have to mount that to a pole to remove the line. Okay, well, it tells us a little bit about the monospool. It tells us how to use the star drag. That's something we've all become accustomed to. It says you can tighten the drag for maximum hold by turning in a clockwise manner. Loosen that drag by turning it in a counterclockwise manner. And it recommends setting it in between so that you have some support for the spool on the way out, but enough that the fish can run And well, you don't have to use your thumb to power or hold back the line that's running out on this spool. So then the next thing they tell you is about the servicing, which I always find interesting. And it says there's a couple of things we can do with this reel. First, I thought was interesting was they tell you don't take the reel apart, and I think even by today's standards, most manufacturers would tell you don't take the reel apart. But if you need to, the best way to keep this, well, from sounding like this, let me take that off for a minute. Best way to keep it from doing that is to oil, and it gives you the oil spots for the reel. The case pivot points on both sides, the line guide, and the worm gear assembly, the handle knobs, and so on. It tells you those are the places that you would like to go and get that done. Now I'm going to rebuild this reel, so we're going to go much beyond that. But then they said if you drop this reel in water or it gets sand or some kind of contaminants, then you're going to have to go inside the reel. And as I mentioned, they note on this project that there's really three components of this reel. There's a frame, a spool, and what they call the cap, the head cap. I guess we would call it the gear side plate, but in this case the one side plate isn't much to speak of, and they tell you to take these out. Now I'm using a micro screwdriver to do that, and you'll get a look inside to see the engineering to this. So the fun one here that I thought was interesting and why I wanted to bring this up was how to clean the reel, and we'll do that as soon as we get this cap off. While I'm doing this, I want to encourage you to subscribe to my channel if you like these kinds of videos, if you like to learn about fishing reels, if you like tips on where to find things and the like. If you'd like to just see how reels are serviced, then I encourage you to subscribe. If you do subscribe, hit that notification button. And well, if you like this kind of a video, I want to ask you to indicate like on the video as well, because, well, that's how Google ranks things. That makes it better for me and for our channel to be successful by reaching more people. Okay, there's 5 screws. I'm going to take that out. This will give us the look inside. It tells us that the plate can now come off. The spool can come out. And here's that kind of an interesting thing. You can see why it's screaming. It's screaming because there's no grease on this reel at all. One neat thing you can notice is that this is a lever system here, spring actuated, and that's what's moving that dog in and out to lock that in place. Kind of an interesting design. We have a main gear, and then the components of the main gear they show us right here. They tell you don't take it off unless you need to. It says taking apart this star drag requires a bit more than ordinary attention, and it isn't advisable unless you get sand and dirt has gotten in there and you need to clean those parts. So if it's necessary, you can take it apart. And what do you do? Well, what do I say to do? Take pictures, right? Well, they're going to provide you with a picture that shows you from the nut cap back how that gear assembly, which is working under here, is all set up just in case you got lost, right? Beautiful spool. You'll notice we have a spool gear on here. And you'll notice the back end of the plate, which needs to be oiled, and the worm drive inside. Well, the last thing it tells you to do then is to care and maintain. We've talked about oiling, not greasing. And here's the thing. I always find something interesting in these things and say you probably won't find this in the manual today. And this is it. Clean your reel frequently with a little bit of gasoline or other grease solvent using a small bristle brush. And it's essential that the reel be kept clean, otherwise you'll get premature wear in the bearings and in the drag washers. So they're going to tell you to scrub it up with a bit of gasoline. And what do I use? I use a penetrating oil, and I generally use that bristle brush, right? So things haven't changed since 1961 at least, when the manufacturer was recommending these types of changes. And then finally it says apply lubricate gear grease, fishing wheel grease, their brand I assume, lightly to the main gear and to the head cap, and a drop or 2 of oil everywhere else. So a lot of times I get the questions, why don't you oil the worm gear I'm sorry, why don't you grease the worm gear or the pawls and that? And my position has always been that grease is going to attract contaminants, and eventually it's going to wear down. It's going to dry up like we see here. Here's a bit of dried grease on the head cap here and so on. And, well, it's just something that even though the oil will evaporate faster, it's to me it's a more prudent kind of a thing to do. Well, that's a look at how you learned about your reel before YouTube, and step-by-step servicing care of the manufacturer. I always find these fun. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did enjoy it, well, please leave that like. And again, if you want to see more of this type of thing, please subscribe. I want to leave you with the thanking of the first responders, our police, fire, safety, rescue, and everybody involved in day-to-day protection and keeping us out of harm's way. I want to thank you for viewing, and I hope that overall, if you have one of these reels, you'll now probably thirst to find the manual if you don't have it. And one of the ways to do that, of course, is what I just mentioned, by going and checking out the Orca website. And again, just anything that has to do with the education, that's what I'm all about transferring my skills, transferring my knowledge, and teaching you how to keep your reels fishing for a long time to come. I hope you've enjoyed that. I wish everybody great times in your search for knowledge. I wish you fun on the water and a great day fishing. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.